Like we got rejected by Y Combinator 3 times. And every time we pitched to them about CO2 utilization, and it's like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you make with this? And guess what? We moved on, 2020 onward. The next year, they opened a whole vertical for carbon tech, and funded a whole bunch of companies doing precisely what we were pitching them like 2, 3 years prior.
Boom, live.
There you
Or so
go.
it says. I quite frankly, I have no idea. And, for the benefit of everybody else, this podcast software was acquired about 16 minutes ago. So this will be a good test run to see if it works.
Exactly. It'll work.
When did you get back from Dubai?
Um, I actually stayed a bit longer than most people in COP 28. So I got in 1st of December. I got back December 14th. So
I see.
2 weeks in and out. But I did also have kind of a family visit. So that just added to the last leg of it, which was great.
Okay, so you started, what was it, a week after Thanksgiving?
That's right. Yep.
And you're there for what, 2 weeks, something like that?
About 2 weeks. Part of it was it's just like so big because it's in a village
Yeah,
in Dubai. So it's not just one place that you go to, say like CERAWeek.
yeah.
It had a whole village with all kind of exhibition floors and sustainability and energy transition and so it just took a while to go to experiment different parts. And then the other thing was I was staying in Dubai, so it's just funny that everyone was so busy during the conference that it was hard to get to find a place to meet with people.
Sure.
But once kind of the conference slowed down and it was more about kind of the policymakers getting together to finalize the commitments and negotiate the language is going to come out and things like that. People were just kind of chilling in Dubai, so that was just easier to get together for coffee in Dubai afterwards. So that worked out too.
Yeah. I saw like 50 pictures that all look like they were from the same spot. Like everyone at COP28 was like an Exxon employee that was taking a picture in front of that, like, funny structure or whatever. It felt like it was,
The big
yeah,
dome in the middle. Yeah.
like everyone was
I,
under some arch or something. That's what it seemed like.
that there's something about I'm not surprised. I think once you see that dome for the first time, it's like, holy hell. It's just, how did they even build this? It's amazing, the size of it. And so it just, everyone just loved it. That's not surprised that a lot of people were taking pictures there. But
Yeah.
yeah, I was looking at the pictures like, yeah, I was there, I was there, I was there. And it was weird that you run into people. It's like, oh, was that CEO of Shamaji that were just like walking by? And just going back to looking at people's LinkedIn profile to make sure these are the same people before you go to say hello. So that's a cool thing about COP that you could run into anybody. Like I went to panels where I got invited to this Bloomberg Green conference,
Hmm.
and when I walked in, Ray Dalio just came out of a room, we're just grabbing coffee, just walking by, and it was like, wait a minute, was that just Ray Dalio just passing by? And he was next on the panel that morning, so I listened to him. And John Kerry was a speaker.
Yeah,
It was just elevated profile of
sure.
just speakers and all around that you could just have a conversation with before, after, which was a cool thing about being there.
Well, I think the celebrities looked at the schedule of where COP was held and said, okay, Dubai seems like a pretty good time in winter versus like, where was it before? It was like Glasgow the
Yeah,
year before. And then
it was
like,
Egypt.
yeah,
Yeah, and next one is gonna be in Baku in Azerbaijan.
yeah.
So that'll be
We'll see if
interesting.
it's
And
as
then
well attended.
right, and the one after that, 2030 in Brazil. And from what I heard, it's going to be more focused on biodiversity. the one in Brazil. So I'm specifically interested to go to that one and just kind of where this conversation lands around including the environmental impact.
Sure.
As much as just like the carbon emissions, like issues like biodiversity. And so the one in Brazil, I think, is going to really be where the rubber meets the road.
So, okay, so switching gears a little bit. I think everyone probably asks you to do your own background. I'm going to try to do a background on you because most smart people, I feel like, are really bad at talking about themselves. I don't really have that problem, but I think you do. So I'm going to try to give your bio and then you just like correct what is wrong. So you grew up in Iran. You moved to the United States. You were in school in Louisiana. You sort of got into the oil and gas business. And then shortly after working at Weatherford, it sounded like you worked at a kind of like a genetics related startup. And that sort of served as a catalyst for you to be like, okay, is there a Venn diagram where I can work on the benefits of genome sequencing or genetics or bio and marry that with oil and gas? So you started Cemvita with your sister, which is like also nuts to me. And it sounds like now there's really three distinct business divisions. One, which is sort of focused on microbes to take CO2 and turn it into, most notably, sustainable aviation fuel. The second, which sounds like it's microbes for mining and biomining to extract further like lithium and copper and precious metals for electrification. And then the third is microbes to put in old oil reservoirs, namely to generate natural hydrogen. So, and you're, it seems like relatively well-funded in Houston, Texas, and seem to be at every conference. So that's that's my bio. Tell me what you correct there.
I think that was pretty awesome. And it was like what I would have said. There's, of course, other things that happen along the way that has formed kind of my point of view or
Sure.
involvement in the things. But yeah, that's just like very factual, just covered everything. And, what I'm doing now in Cemvita, actually, most of my time is just on the carbon utilization part of what we do in Cemvita, because what you mentioned with the gold hydrogen subsurface by manufacturing of natural hydrogen, that has been spun out as its own company, right?
Yep.
And is funded on its own path, as well as the mining business. So we didn't intend to create three companies, and that was just, we initially had this platform for applications of industrial biotech in energy transition, but quickly realized that we can't run these as just like business units because the verticals that they're in are quite different, from mining to upstream oil and gas to then the kind of a sustainable feedstocks vertical. So, decided that as a business strategy, spinning out is going to give them better chances of success. And so that was 3 years ago. And since then, we executed basically that plan. So, and that allowed me to now focus on the carbon conversion business. And it's all really anchored by a offtake agreement that we have with United Airlines for SAF. And so the work that we do is to basically create the sustainable feedstock that then is used to produce SAF.
Sure. So, if you start in Iran and then you come, like there's a big jump from, like I think, everyone knows you have a very strong Cajun accent. Perhaps we dive in a little bit on that story.
Yeah, Persian Cajun is as I call it. But yeah, actually, I'm happy that, when I came to US, if you would have asked me, we're going to Louisiana, Montana, whatever else, I just said, it's US, it's great, let's go. It doesn't matter what it is once you land. So I only applied to one university, and that was UL Lafayette. And the professor there, just off of that application, said, this looks good to me. And I didn't do anything else. It said at the time it was like, why would I spend another $100 application fee for this other UT whatever or A&M, and I didn't know really as much about the profiles and like Ivy League
You
and
were a cheap date,
whatever else.
you know. You were just
Yeah,
like,
I was efficient. I said, this is the pathway, so let's just do it. But the fun part is where I did get my culture shock coming to US was once I landed and we went to Bourbon Street on Mardi Gras, basically from Iran, and that's where I was like, okay, we have arrived.
It's like,
And
like you're telling me there's no Bourbon Street and Mardi Gras in Iran?
absolutely not, far from it. So, yeah, actually, since then, and it's interesting how Louisiana has become like this second home. So even now that I've lived in Houston for about 15 years, I'll use any opportunity to go back. As a matter of fact, just last night we're making plans to go back
Oh, really?
to Mardi Gras because it's coming up, next month. So,
Yeah, Mardi Gras with a baby emoji is a little different than, let's call it, 20 years ago or 15 years ago.
exactly, yeah.
That's funny. So then, okay, so first gig out of college, it sounds like Weatherford.
Actually, there was a chapter before that,
Oh, really?
and yeah. So the first
That
job that I
chapter has
had.
been excluded, Moji, from LinkedIn. I just want you to know that there was an exclusion event there.
No, that's where you have to say more experiences, and it would drop down. But the first job I got was at this company called Tesco.
Okay.
They do drilling technology. It was top drives, casing drilling, and casing running. The way I got that job was when I was in master's program. The whole time I was stressed out about, well, I need to get a job after this, right? And so I decided the pathway to do that is to actually do a thesis as a project that a company needs, right? So then I could then kind of use that as my entry, and that's pretty much what happened. I literally just researched drilling technology, and casing drilling came up, and I got interested in that. And as I was researching it, I realized casing drilling is actually a trademark for this company name that will keep coming up called Tesco. So I looked into it, and it's like, oh, they're in Houston, and this is what they do. So I reached out to them and said, I love this tech. I want to do research about it. Is there a problem that you're trying to solve that I could help with? And this is not going to cost you anything. I'm just going to do this research, and I will just give you the thesis at the end as well. So it just turned out that the guy that opened the email was a UL alumni who loves Lafayette and who has had apparently this Iranian roommate that he, had done a lot of fun stuff together. So he just loved it, and he just went on and on about his time at UL Lafayette and all the fun that they had, and it just worked out. So he said, yeah, there is one thing that we are working through. They were trying to figure out a phenomena that was happening. I won't get into the full story, but there's this thing called plastering effect, where you're drilling with casing instead of drill pipe, because casing is bigger diameter, right? As you're turning it and drilling, it actually rubs itself on the wellbore wall. So when you're drilling through areas where you would normally experience lost circulation, like you lose the mud to the formation, with casing, they were not seeing that, and they were wondering, is it that the casing is kind of healing some of the fractures, and is that why? And if so, how do we control that? What is the right diameter of the casing compared to the wellbore? What about the particle size distribution of the lost circulation material and all that stuff?
What year was this?
This is 2009 and 2010.
So you're really knocking out where like people really still didn't really know what they were doing in terms of like full scale horizontal development.
Yeah, that was starting to kind of really take front and center, but this was more about surface vertical holes, even though we did also directional, but it wasn't for hydraulic fracturing. It was more for conventionals. But yeah, that led to the project that I started with them. They would send me samples, and basically I finished half of what the whole scope would have been. So by the time I was graduating, I told them, hey, I'm graduating, by the way, and this is what I've done, and this is what I could see as the next steps. So I made up an excuse and said, I'm going to be in Houston, would love to meet with you all and present and this and this. And they said, okay, yeah, come on in. And I went there. Then Monty Montgomery, who was the guy who I first talked to, he took me and introduced me to the VP and another people. And it just worked out at the time, in this 2010, that they ended up saying, yeah, we might as well just get this guy to finish this work. So that's how I got the job with Tesco. I was there for about 2.5 years. And that then Schlumberger bought our division of casing drilling from Tesco.
Oh, okay.
And that's when I was already engaging also with Weatherford, and I decided to just move to Weatherford. So that was, that the Weatherford chapter that you started with.
Well, that's, and in a classic fashion, you did not apply to any other jobs when you were leaving ULA. You just, took that one. And
every job that I've applied to, I've been rejected. Like the only ones that I've gotten has been the ones that kind of worked out naturally,
yeah,
or that I have started somehow. Like I've tried to get into Exxon way back, a few other companies, I was just gotten rejected, which I'm grateful now. But
you can make the argument that Cemvita would not exist if all these people wanted to hire you, right? Like there is
Absolutely.
There's like we've probably talked about this, but I think for everything there's like a front door, which is probably like, here's a job offering, drop your resume, and then they like peel it down to the number of people. Then there's like a back door, which is like, hey, I have this like unfair relationship to get this job. In your case, it was, I did all this work for you when I was a graduate student for a year. So like I have this like backdoor access into the seat. And then I think there's always a side door. And the side door is like the dude who shows up in like the weirdest, most creative way, right? And a lot of what I think you do now, and I think like most entrepreneurs have to do, is like you're just thinking about the side door all day, because there is no, like if you play the front door game, you'll lose every single time.
That's a great way to put it. I think so. And it's also more true in cases where there's a new industry, there's a new category being created. And people often talk about that in kind of a very good kind of innovative way, but it's a very messy and painful thing. Sure. when you're in it. And so you have to be creative and think of those side doors, whether if it's for getting a job, whether if it's for getting new contract, new business, getting companies on board with the vision. Like I've seen this play out now, and it's really interesting. From 2017, 18, where this CCUS just kind of started to become a topic. At the time, they wouldn't say CCUS. It was more like carbon capture and CO2, and it was more around sequestration and EOR to what it is now, with like a full span. Like we got rejected by a Y Combinator 3 times. And every time we pitched to them about CO2 utilization, and it's like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you make with this? And guess what? We moved on, 2020 onward. The next year, they opened a whole vertical for carbon tech, and funded a whole bunch of companies doing precisely what we're pitching them, like 2-3 years prior. So.
But you did not apply a fourth time. At that point, you moved on.
Yeah, at that point, it didn't make sense for us anymore to give up the 7% or whatever for the $200K, because we've already raised our seed round, Series A. But I learned my lesson in terms of there is something as being early, but the key is if you're pitching things that could be too early, like how do you do it? Like how do you pitch it? It's not assuming that they know about the space and you're just like trying to convince them, because that just doesn't work,
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then how to not get frustrated also by the rejections along the way, because it's not their fault. They're just trying to understand the space and see, is this real? Like, how does it work? Who else is supporting this? Are we hearing the same thing from other investors or whatnot? And far less people are visionaries than what they think, especially in the among investors too, right? So it's just absorbing all of that and see what's the right timing for what pitch.
Yeah. So you're at Weatherford. When I think everyone wants to glorify like a Genesis story. They're usually like not very interesting, actually. Is yours interesting? I mean, first of all, working with your sister. If I had to work with my sister every day, that startup would have failed 45 minutes into the like. There's 0% probability of that ever happening. How's that like? How did that effectively start? What was the conversation there?
Yeah, so people ask me about that, and the thing I say is it's much better than working with your spouse. I think that would be the one that I would really worry about, and it's also a lot of different kind of risk associated. With me and Tara, it works, and there's reasons for that. One is that we do different things. Like I focus on the business and the commercialization. She trusts me with that. She's focused on the science and tech, and I trust her with that. And so our skills are complementary. The other thing is, in a co-founding situation, the number one and the most important thing that you absolutely need, which makes a lot of companies that fail, is because that thing goes down out the window, is trust. And knowing that no matter what the situation is, the other person has good intentions. So the rest is about communication. There's something missing. Maybe we're not understanding each other, or sometimes you boil it down. It's like, no, that's not the issue. We're just having a disagreement. And then you have to have a process for making a decision and for both to support it with the good intention. So that is huge to have in a relationship when it's with, say, your sibling, but it's the caveat and the sacrifice is, if you're not careful, you lose your sibling relationship.
Yeah.
And we had the issue with that. So like we had to sit down and, for example, say, okay, let's go out and we're just not going to talk about work, which is it's much harder than
not easy,
you think, right?
It's easier said than done, right? Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, it's hard.
And it's a weird thing. It's like you're retraining yourself. It's like to say for me to talk to Tara as my sister, not as my co-founder, and the same thing. And then the origin story came from when I was at the previous company, Biota. We commercialized DNA sequencing in the subsurface, right? Through that, I learned about biotech because our main investor was Illumina, and Illumina is this really big DNA sequencing. They're the reason that DNA sequencing actually became inexpensive because they built these high throughput machines. So I was just very excited about the potential for not just DNA sequencing, but just like genomics and biotech in biology is like so powerful, and it feels like us humans are like monkeys banging on a computer. Like we don't know like so much about it. And that's when Tara had moved to US, and I shared with her, this is the company. And it's like, oh, I know this area because she was doing tissue engineering, stem cell programming. She had written a book for Springer talking about, molecular mechanisms of autonomy in biological systems. So a lot of the curiosities that I had, the questions, she actually was researching it professionally. So just like through organic conversations, dinner, whatever, like she shared some of those things with me. And when I did Biota, it wasn't just because I want to be part of this startup or whatever. It was more like, I want to learn how this works for when I want to do it, right? So it was like going to school. And then it turns out Tara also had her own frustrations being in academia, a lot of the ideas that she had to just like kind of assign and not be too close to the application. So the idea was like, wait a minute, like there's something here. So would it make sense for us to explore this? Like if I have learned a bit about commercialization and startups and you have a lot of great ideas, can we team up? And we did. And, out of that came Cemvita.
So it sounds like it was really just the big inflection point that is like, look, DNA sequencing, the cost of genomics has gone down tremendously. That cost curve continues to go down. How about we take advantage of all of the monumental learnings in this category and try to apply it to another industrial use case. Did you know that out the gate you wanted to focus on oil and gas or natural resources, or was that just a function of being in Houston and saying, hey, what's a good commercial use case here?
Yeah, no, initially we were actually focus on the tech and see what is possible. And that's even rooted in the name of the company. You know, Cemvita is code, energy, and mass, because part of what Tara was doing in the Springer book that she published was she proposed this new idea for relativity of code, energy, and mass. And what she was saying was that we all know about relativity of energy and mass, but in biological things, there is this third element which seems to be driving how energy is converted to mass and vice versa. And say DNA is an example of that. So it's like the biological material, which is also the data, which is unlike say 0 and 1 who don't have a, you know, like a mass and energy level, right? So code, energy, and mass, and vita is like life in Latin, right? So then basically we zoom in on this idea that, wait a minute, like us humans, we're really good at converting mass to energy or forms of energy, like when we burn stuff to make heat or like, but we know very little about converting energy to mass. Like it will happen with photosynthesis with like photons and light to glucose, for example, right? And it's like, is this something that we could actually do? Like, can we build technology that
these biological processes?
Right, yeah. And so we zoomed in on that and we said, okay, what if we build a machinery that could do that? And that's how we zoomed in on photosynthesis as the first use case, and that's how CO2 linkage came to be. CO2 and water, light to sugar as a feedstock. We did a project initially for actually deep space exploration with the idea of using the CO2 that astronauts breathe out, turning that into sugar so that they could eat as a regenerative life support system. And because the sugar that they would use, it's not about the cost of the sugar, it's about being able to do it. It's a life support system. And then further down, say for Mars, you know, as they call it in the space, in situ resource utilization is the same idea, right? So, but you know, once we kind of, that was just kind of get a feel for what's possible. But then around 2017-18, this big wave came through with, at the time, ESG and carbon, and companies started to talk about it. And, you know, I could see that, okay, this is going to be a thing. So at the beginning, I said, okay, well, I know some of the players in this space, so let's go talk to them. So, but when we talked to them about CO2 utilization, it was like, so, like, are you talking about EOR? Or like, is this a direct air capture? And it was just not resonating at all. Like they just didn't get it, and we didn't know how to better explain it.
I mean, the primary utilization case, and even today, right? The vast majority is just enhanced oil recovery, right? It is, we're using CO2 to pump more oil. That seems to be, at least at this 10 seconds in time, the most compelling use case of CO2. Whether people are excited about that or not is perhaps a separate discussion, but that is a primary CO2 utilization use case today.
Exactly. That has the volume that is actually meaningful.
Right.
But you know, where for us at least there was this kind of a change that also kicked things into gear for Cemvita was I got a spot thanks to Maynard Holt, John Gibson at the time at TPH. They were doing this crazy kind of entrepreneurial events called Energy Disruption. And
this is when? What year would this have been?
This is 2018, October, I think.
Okay.
So I got a spot to do a presentation, and it's still online, the presentation.
Oh, really?
The video. And basically I called it, this is CO2 utilization from Mars to Midland. And what I was presenting was, are you guys aware that space industry has been thinking about carbon and CO2 utilization for a long time? first of all, why is it that oil and gas is not being the industry taking the lead on that research? Because if anyone knows about carbon transformation, it has to be us than any other industry. And then second, how could we use those learnings in this CCUS emerging category from space industry and beyond? And who are going to be the leaders in that space? And I had a slide where, I was talking about, is this going to happen to oil and gas, or is oil and gas going to take the lead and participate proactively? Yellow cab, Uber kind of comparison, innovator's dilemma in real time. And turns out Vicky Holub also had a talk at the same conference. And she mentioned about this initiative that they're working towards, and the focus on carbon management. And Tara was there. I told Tara that that's Vicky Holub, CEO of Oxy. You got to find a way to say hi to her. So, the thing with Tara is not like a sales person or like what you would call
it. It's probably a good thing, by the way.
Right.
It's probably a really good thing that the most technical person is not very good at sales. That's probably a good sign.
Or like a obvious extrovert, but if she's on a mission, she would get it done. So she's like, all right. So she went, from what she told me, she actually ended up catching up with Vicky coming out of the bathroom or like on the way out or something, and made the connection. And Vicky said, oh, this is very interesting that you could do stuff with CO2. There's someone that you need to talk to at Oxy. Let me connect you guys. And they exchanged cards. So we set up that meeting. That turned out to be Rob Zeller.
Okay.
And that initiative turned out to be Oxy Low Carbon Ventures that they were about to launch.
Sure.
And Rob, when we met him, and this is why we love Rob, because he's first principle kind of thinker, visionary, which is who exactly was the person that was needed to launch that initiative. So kudos to Oxy. And also he was coming from Oxy Chem. So his view was like, I know about this EOR and all that, but his world is on surface and he knows about gas transformation, right? So he told us about VCM and ethylene, and that can you make ethylene from CO2? We said it's possible, plants do it. And then that ended up being the first project, which ended up becoming the investment from Oxy and, everything else from there.
Well, so that's awesome. So you effectively have a second inflection point, which is, call it 2018, carbon management becomes a thing. Now, it's only really a thing because Oxy wanted it to be a thing. To be clear, it didn't feel like there was anybody else that was really taking the charge on that. But that is the second inflection point, right? Like if Vicky hadn't really been there, or like that, if they had been focused on something else, it probably would have started a different day.
Yeah, I think so. And the other part of this was, and this goes to talk about there are companies doing this that came from the industry that are in Houston, for example, and there's others that more like opportunistic or people who don't know about the hard assets and the actual industry, but they're passionate about helping out, right? I think it was very helpful that the fact that I had been to the Oxy office many times before with Weatherford, with Biotech, with Tesco, that this intro came from Vicky, that we were in Houston, that Tara was there laying out the foundation of the science of what she thought was possible, resonating with Rob as also a PhD, kind of having the conversation. And Rob keeping that open mind. It's like, let's see what they could do. I mean, this is just like two people with an idea. But usually this is not normal to happen with, say, a company like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of serendipity here, right?
Company like Oxy.
If you had been doing the same version of R&D in Boston, it's highly unlikely that you would be this focused on this industry. I don't see how that would have happened.
Right. Yeah. And that's where we once we kind of turn this more into a system of, oh, wait a minute, what can industry biotech do for energy transition across the landscape and the mining and the subsurface and everything else? Then the view was, there's a lot of possibilities, but there's this gap in the translation and how
Sure.
to think about what are the applications. And so I picked that to be basically a focus area for me as the thing that I want to create is how to take an industry that's proven, like biotech, but then see how do we translate that into use cases that are now ready to explore. And this is not something we could expect, say, from Oxy to
Sure.
know because they don't have genetic engineers in house. Why would they? And it also doesn't make sense for them to go say, let's go build a biotech lab to explore. No, that just makes no sense. What they had done before, most big companies, when they want to do this, they go like pay some money to university, some grants here and there, but they all have a terrible experience with that. Like they haven't seen much value come from
Sure.
that. And so I think that this is why you see this big traction now with the startups doing versions of this with big companies and becoming a bigger part of the innovation system, apart from the internal R&D that companies are doing and in partnership with them.
So if you think about them sort of taking a bit of a charge, when do all the other companies come after them? So if you said Oxy's taking a bit of a charge, let's call it October 2018, when did you start seeing other sort of the herd coming in from a momentum perspective?
I think it depends what aspect of CCUS you're referring
Yeah.
to. At the time, other companies made bets. If you remember, there was this alliances forming. There was like, Oxy in carbon engineering. There was Exxon
Yep.
and
And
Global
that was like
Thermostat.
2019 maybe on DAC, something like that.
Yes, yeah. So DAC alone was a thing, and not as much CO2 utilization
Sure.
at the time. But then off the back of that, there was this bigger push on sequestration,
Hmm.
and language is starting to change from CCS to CCUS. And then actually DAC was not a standard. It was more, they call it direct air capture and carbon capture, but then the DAC terminology compared to CCUS became more like these are the different aspects.
Sure.
Um, yeah, I would say 2019 probably took another year for that spectrum to start forming and companies are starting to make bets. And that's still continuing in terms of what's the end use case and the strategy for decarbonization.
Yeah, I mean, and then you have another inflection point really with the IRA, and we're still
Yes.
getting some version of clarity around that today, right? So you have new clarity around hydrogen, which was really up in the air for a while, and it feels like, it seems like a lot of people are not necessarily happy about the language that sort of came out of that.
Yeah, I've been getting just talking to different people from different parts of the ecosystem. There's definitely, but I've seen more negative reaction to it than positive.
Well, it's
People
like
being
a really
pissed off.
strict set of guidelines, right? So, like, regardless of what you think it should look like, you had a bunch of people really excited about it. So they anchored this, like, we're going to put in a bunch of money to generate hydrogen that's going to get subsidized. And now you sort of look at reality and say, oh, it was a lot more, we expected it to be a lot more generous than it was, rightfully or wrongfully. And now all the people who are sort of on the wrong end of that are not very pleased, right? So what it does is it does reduce capex in that category. Like, without a doubt, there's already a bunch of projects that have been yanked. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But that market is going to be smaller than what I think people expected it to be a year ago, because there was an expectation there was a lot more money flooding into that market, right?
That's right. Yeah. And the way that kind of crosses over with some of the work we have on the way is mostly on the gold hydrogen side of
Yeah.
things, because there's basically what we're trying to do with gold hydrogen is to get to less than $1 per kg
Yeah.
at about the same carbon intensity as green hydrogen, which is
Yeah.
close to nothing.
Yeah.
And that's because we just don't have emissions. Like we
Yeah.
recapture, reinject the CO2, and the rest is just powering the pumps to inject the
Yeah.
package of the microbes and the nutrients. But interestingly enough, that is providing a lot of people who are looking only at kind of a green hydrogen and the ecosystem. Now I've been getting more requests like, let's talk about that again. The gold hydrogen part in that spectrum, because I think curious to hear your thoughts. Eventually the color things will just kind of
Yeah.
go away, and it's more about what's your cost, what's your carbon intensity, and
Right.
that's been also in the guidelines. They never cared as much about the this is for green or whatever. It's more about that sliding 0 to 3. It's not doesn't talk about colors. It's just talking about the carbon intensity. So
Well,
that's a good thing.
I think most people are going to look at what is the most capitalist opportunity. So, like, if you remove, like, what is sustainability and what is not, I think at its very core, what is sustainable is something that makes money. And so here, if you incentivize a bunch of subsidy for something, and all of a sudden it makes money, money will pour into it. Whether or not it would have without subsidy, sort of a different question. Now, so on the subject of like gold hydrogen, to me, the use case, and we've talked about this, is you have a bunch of old oil wells. And the reality is that, is plugging them the best thing you can do for those wells that in theory could survive another 10 years and be productive in any sort of fashion. And whether it's chemical treatment, whether it's some sort of novel solvent, whether it's microbes, sort of to me are sort of irrelevant, so long as it's something that we can put down, and now all of a sudden we've turned what is a liability into an asset. And if you can mix that hydrogen into nat gas and sort of make it now carbon negative, all of a sudden that can be feedstock for whether it's renewable natural gas to generate SAF someday. Like, there's a trillion different ways to play that green molecule longer term. But I think, like, forget about the green molecule for a moment. If I'm taking something that at its very core is now like either it's worth zero or it's a liability, and I can make it worth something, that's like wealth generation, right? Like just period. And it just makes good economic sense. So whether or not you like hydrogen is in some ways is sort of irrelevant to me on gold hydrogen. I think it is a solution to solve what is a growing problem from a plugging and abandonment perspective, right? Which is a whole different sort of can of worms, but you can take a liability and turn it into an asset. So, what's wrong with it?
100%. Nothing. And actually, even to like you said, from capitalist point of view, like even if you don't care about the solution, the fact that this delays that plugging
Correct.
abandonment
You
liability by
solved my
5 years,
problem. My problem is I have a plugging
that's
and
already
abandonment problem, right? Exactly. The other thing that I think is fascinating about gold hydrogen is, generally speaking, the bigger a company gets, and look, like, this is native to every industry. This is not just native to the oil and gas business. This is native to every industry. The bigger you get, the less risk you're willing to take. And so when a startup comes in and says, hey, like, I have this novel tech, like, will you try it out? The response, like, by default has to be no, right? Because someone has been burnt. Like, no one gets promoted for like sticking their neck out for some startup where the probability of success is like 1 or 2%. Like, it's just, it doesn't happen, right? Like, the incentives are not aligned for that to happen. So I don't necessarily blame anyone for this happening. However, when you're like, hey, I want to use this and I want to use it on the wells that like no one cares about, all of a sudden it's like, oh, like, fine, like, you run your experiment there. I don't care, because those are inconsequential to the bottom line, right? So it's a fascinating sort of risk reward, I think, for an oil and gas operator, which I think most startups don't have the benefit of. In your circumstance, it's like a really, like, virtually no downside risk. So I always thought it was if you can't tell, I'm bullish on it for that reason.
Yeah, I just need, a lot more people to think like you, inside operators. But you did say something important about the risk and reward, which,
Yeah.
right now, I think the industry is very open-minded. They are making bets. They are. But at the same time, the way I like to think of the role that we play, and this is what I tell them directly, is like, think of us as your extended R&D arm to
Sure.
go and explore some of these crazy ideas that maybe it's not right for to engage more people inside the company. And let's work together in terms of what is that tangible framework in the set of milestones that you need to see to then see, all right, now I'm gonna, engage more fully other people inside the company. And seeing us as a partner in that exploration, especially given that this is something that's specialized with biotech and subsurface microbiology or whatnot, right? Kind of that falls outside of their wheelhouse. We could definitely fill that gap. And I think it's the playing the reverse of the innovator's dilemma in that it's like if there is a chances of disruption, let us help you fill the gap so that you
Sure.
have the optionality, to double down so that you don't get disrupted in that scenario, because that is also our business model to enable those companies. The one thing that, I don't know how much you're looking at this evolve in the space about
Sure.
geologic and natural and white hydrogen. That's the one I'm curious to see when the big kind of oil and gas companies just start to lean in more proactively and
On natural
take it
hydrogen.
seriously. Right.
Yeah. I think it's no dissimilar to me than like geothermal, right? Like here is an opportunity to generate, whether it's molecules or whether it's power by leveraging your core expertise, which is deciding where to drill, drilling the well, and then putting it online, right? So I have been hearing rumblings about it. I don't think I've heard as many rumblings about it as I've heard on like CCS or geothermal things
Hmm.
like that. But it is a topic of conversation. I think the transportation element becomes sort of troublesome on some of that stuff, but it is interesting. Like and without a doubt, someone's going to spend some time there. Like I think the fascinating part is if you take a lot of these large companies and you put even a small percentage of their capex into energy transition. So like you'll catch a lot of flack, which is like, oh, Exxon's only spending like 2% of their capital budget here or something like that. It's like, yeah, but that's like a lot of money, right? In absolute terms. And like you could want it to be like a
Right.
lot bigger, but it sort of doesn't matter because it's like billions of dollars. And so like by definition, if that billions of dollars gets diversified, like there's going to be a couple hundred million that find itself in a natural hydrogen division relatively soon, right? And
Right.
that's where the R&D dollars of scale come through in partnership with a startup that says, "Hey, I have some novel idea. I don't have the funds, I don't have the resources to execute on all of this. If I'm right, you're going to make a lot of money. If I'm wrong, it pretty much doesn't cost you anything." So, like, do you like that risk reward? And it just takes one person like you guys had in fall of 2018 to be like, all right, let's try it out, see where this goes. And
Exactly. Yeah.
so it is an interesting risk reward. But I think a little bit from a trend perspective, we're probably like there was a lot of hype around a lot of these categories. Let's call it when the IRA first passed, and like a quarter after that. Um, the macro today is like sort of interesting where you got like low-ish commodity prices and high-ish interest rates. And so I don't like, we're hearing every couple of weeks about like some energy transition startup or project sort of getting delayed or canceled or whatever. And so we're probably in the winter of some of this from a trend perspective. That's okay. Like these things sort of come in ebbs and flows. I'm curious what you think like people should think about in that winter, right? Like we've talked about this a little bit, but like it you've been playing this category in some way or another since before it was cool, if you will. And then it became really cool and it became really hot and then it sort of cooled off a bit. What do you think, is the best thing to do now when we are, call it in the winter?
I think it just, and you said it already, it's just going to the fundamentals. Like if what you do has a business model that is going to create revenue that could compete with the status quo, and that is the whole point of the focus that we have on CO2 utilization as opposed to just sequestration. Sequestration doesn't have a business model. Everyone
Yep.
spends money, no one makes money. Then and if you could do that conversion, like whether if it's to renewable feedstocks, SAF or whatnot that could compete with the
Yeah.
alternative. Let's say if it's from soybean oil, used cooking oil, or whatever, you're in business.
Yep.
And let those environmental attributes, both in terms of the carbon intensity, in terms of the reducing the environmental footprint, be the bonus that helps someone choose you versus the other guy, but not the driving factor.
Right.
You know,
That
and
green
so
premium sort of has to disappear, right? Like, no one wants to pay more for the same thing, unless
right, yeah.
you can create that parity, right?
Right. And so this is where like fundamentally, let's say if you think about e-fuels versus using biology to make
Sure.
renewable feedstocks. So that's what's fundamentally is different because we're not just using biology because it's like sustainable. It's because it has the power to actually bring the cost down because reactions are precise. You don't have random, co-products, byproducts to deal with. You could run the reactions under ambient pressure and temperature. What does that mean? Oh, you don't have to supply 800 degrees C and spend that energy. And so taking that learning and applying it here is a chance to bring the cost down. Now, that comes with those environmental benefits, and that's great. But so yeah, I would, and this is what we have been doing, across all from the beginning, but now more focusedly, like you said, last year and perceived winter, is to just see how could we compete on cost, and then have those LCA be the bonus.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so one last topic to cover. If you weren't working on Cemvita, is there any opportunity set that you think is interesting? Like, if you were to start a new business today or tomorrow or something, and you couldn't work on what you're currently working on, or like someone else should go start this business, what do you think? What do you think it is?
Actually, there is one thing, and it's also when Tara and I were ideating on like
Yeah.
what to work on, we went through a few weeks of like exploring, just going crazy in terms of what are the things, and this whole category of energy conversion and sustainability was one, and then the other one, which is still very passionate about, is biological data storage and computing. And
Okay.
so the idea of if you've looked into the energy input into data storage and
Yeah, it's
the
huge.
increase in demand
Yeah.
and also the limitations that we're having in computing power
Yep.
and whether if it's even supercomputers and the fact that we still cannot have exact solutions to problems that translate into things like protein folding, which is the underlying mechanism for some diseases. Because if your body is not making certain protein, Alzheimer's, other form of diseases that are linked to protein folding, there's other optimizations. For example, if Amazon wants to send a package, how do you decide what route is going to give you the
Yep.
most fuel efficient pathway and what truck and things like that. So that all translates into solving the same problem. And turns out our body under ambient pressure and temperature is solving
Go
like
all
millions of
day,
those
every day. Yeah.
problems every
Yeah.
second.
Yeah.
And this is also why your brain, that is only a small percentage, is like 3 pounds compared to your body weight,
Sure.
but it's spending 25% of your energy input is going to your brain
Yeah.
because it's doing that. So when is it that humans could start to actually understand that and build
Yeah.
computers that could replicate that, right? I think that's really fascinating
So you're
area.
effectively saying, look, we have like a compute infrastructure which is built on, whatever it's built on, but it's not built on any sort of biological replication, right? And now we're going to build all this generative AI, and it's just like code running on steroids on top of GPUs. Your contention is, what if we took that same approach, but we built it the same way the human bodies and the human brain works, versus the way it currently works?
Yeah, and I mean, the most advanced technology that exists in the world is the human body. And that's the cool thing about biology is that it cannot be denied. Like once you
Sure.
see a plant growing outside, photosynthesizing, that's technology at work.
Yeah.
Now, if we don't yet understand it and can't replicate it, that's our problem. We're just
Right.
very early in that journey of understanding, and we've come a long way, but still, like, there's so much we don't know, right? But that whole category of understanding biology and then re-engineering it for things that we need, whether
Yeah.
if it's for sustainability, enabling new applications, all of that stuff, is just like so fascinating to me. And
Yeah.
part of it is just thanks to Tara, just exposing me to some of these ideas, reading her book. She lays out some of the foundations of the same kind of the biology of life and how that's described, you know. So yeah, if he was in Cemvita, I definitely would love to, because that's just fun to do. Like I don't
Sure.
see those as like a job to do or something. That's just like fun to do.
Well, you're swapping a little bit of your Venn diagram here, right? Which is like if your Venn diagram here is like, okay, biology, the benefits of gene sequencing and everything we've got going on there, and then one circle around industrial application, let's say, broadly outside of energy's encompassed there. You're just switching that circle with like general compute, right? Like, and how can we change like computation by being influenced by those other two things?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, awesome. If anyone wants to catch you, what's the easiest way to get a hold of you?
LinkedIn probably would be the easiest way.
Yeah, you got like it's a lot of followers.
I'm a micro influencer.
You're a micro influencer. Well, awesome, Moji. It was good catching up. I'll catch you again soon.
Likewise.
All right, man.
Awesome. Sounds good, man. Take care. Bye.